Welcome to Lessons in Dyslexic Thinking, where we learn what dyslexic thinking is and how we can employ it to change the world. This lesson in dyslexic thinking was recorded live at the World Dyslexia Assembly in New York City. I'm very lucky because we've worked with GCHQ as a charity for a few years now, and I know how much you value dyslexic thinking in your organisation. So much so that GCHQ recruits 4 times as many dyslexics into its apprentice scheme than any other. Why do dyslexics make great spies?
Look, thanks. Thanks, Kate. I have to say, coming into a big sign that says SPIES, I usually try and go a bit more undercover than that. But I know many of you will be disappointed I didn't turn up in Aston Martin, but it turns out that spying, keeping the country safe, is all about how you get the right mix of minds to come together to solve the seemingly impossible. So you're right, GCHQ has deeply valued people who think differently, to use some of Richard's language, who simplify, who try and do things which people didn't think was possible, but to see the patterns amongst the noise. And so we've had 100 years of doing that. And when I look back at our history, I literally can trace it back over 100 years. I can trace it back to those people who turned up in Bletchley Park to solve the problem of the Enigma during World War II. And I can see it in the problems that we face every day, including right up to today, with how we're having to deal with a war in Europe for the first time in my lifetime, but for over 75 years.
I'm really fascinated to know what you think the impact of AI is going to be on intelligence.
When I look at the type of people we employ, and I didn't pick up on your reference, but you are right in saying that we have nearly 3 or 4 times the national average of people who have dyslexia in our apprentice scheme. And when I look at the numbers of people who've come through our organisation, I can see that all the way through. And of course, what happens in my organisation is people are looking for ways to keep the country safe. And in GCHQ, we've always done that with technology, with languages, with people who analyze, with people who try and work out how they can have an effect down on the ground, change the facts. And when you look then at a technology like artificial intelligence or machine learning, I've been sitting here today right up there, listening to panelist after panelist say how important it is. And I think that's right. If you look at the way that sort of technology can, if you like, co-pilot alongside my people who analyze, alongside my people who think about language. So I see it as an augmentative technology. But I don't think we should be under any illusions. Of course, it needs to be built in a way where it does good, where it meets our values. And so when I think about that, then I think about the sorts of people that we should have creating that technology. And that means there's a place for people who think differently, with the neurodiverse characteristics, which Richard didn't like the label, but we're stuck with it a bit. But that sense of having people who think differently, helping to form and shape the technology, that's a real positive view as well. There is a bit of a darker side to it. And of course, our adversaries will use the same technologies. And so how we differentiate ourselves from our adversaries will be how we bring, again, that right mix of minds together to keep the country safe and to safeguard our values.
Technology is obviously increasingly going to be a threat towards security. What role does dyslexia have in stopping that threat?
Well, look, people who think differently, people with dyslexia are integral to my teams. And when I see dyslexic people in my teams, then they are team players. They can see through the noise to see the facts. They are really good at simplifying. And in this day and age, when technology is increasing the pace of everything, then those teams have to be more and more effective. So I deliberately go out and look for people who think differently. We deliberately try and create teams and value people who think differently. It's not just about attracting those sorts of people into our workforce. It's about how we make the most of their skills and their potential when they're here. So when I hear your previous panelists talk about the adjustments that they've made or want to be made in their workplaces, then we do a lot of that already. When people come to be interviewed with us, we look for ways to make that experience easier. For example, we allow people to park questions if they're not ready to answer them. We give people extra time, of course, and when they're inside, then we try and make sure the workspace is as compatible with their skills to be fully part of the team that we need to keep the country safe.
Amazing, Jeremy. Thank you so much. So there's a career out there for all you dyslexic thinkers. You can become a spy. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thank you.
We've heard why GCHQ values dyslexic thinking so much. Now let's hear from 2 dyslexic spies in the field about how their dyslexic thinking helps them to keep the country safe.
As an intelligence analyst, I work in a 24/7 operations centre, and I can't go into too much detail on what I do, but I can say that I'm an analyst working on some of the biggest incidents threatening the UK. I'm often looking through a lot of data, and I find that my dyslexia helps me to see the bigger picture and spot patterns that aren't always obvious to everyone else around me. I also find that my approach to finding solutions is very different. I often think quite fast and outside of the box, and this is key to my job.
And presumably, I mean, just thinking about all of the billions and billions of pieces of communication that are happening around the world, that's what your 24/7 centre is looking at, isn't it? So that it must be really critical that you're looking at those gaps and spotting all the connections.
Yeah, it's also really cool to be working in that job doing this work. I really didn't think that's what I would be doing when I joined.
Fantastic. And the other thing, Rob, that I wanted to pick up with you on is that I think what I didn't truly understand until I started doing the research is how much of a role GCHQ has working with the military and actually keeping our troops safe. So it's not just about keeping the country safe and all of the things that we've discussed. There's a big emphasis on working with the army and making sure that they're safe. And I know your role as at GCHQ did involve working with the military at some point. Is that right?
Yes, so I spent quite a few years deploying with the military. I was very fortunate to get a number of campaign medals, so I do have a range of medals that I can never wear anywhere, but I do have a range of them. The kids know about them, but that's it. And that's along with about 300 other staff within the organisation who've done that. So I spent a lot of time, but used my dyslexic skills to spot opportunities of how we could do things differently. And I, as the innovator, I had spent a lot of time talking to people internally who invent stuff, and also a lot of contacts out with industry, and find ways that we could use capabilities that were never planned to do what we use them for, and then use them to deliver amazing effects. So, you know, I spent the time I spent out in the Balkans and Iraq and stuff like that, you know, quite active places. They were entertaining, not what you'd normally expect of a civil servant, and basically changed the way we did it. Then I was able to communicate that very much as a story, not write it down, because my writing is appalling, still is, never solved that one. But I could tell a good story and convince the leaders in the military and HQ that we could do things differently. And from there, I went on to build loads of stuff that we trialed on exercises, and really changed how we produce and deliver the intelligence that enables forces to be effective, as well as keeping them safe, which is very important.
And as your job as transformational innovator, that is just such a cool title. You're finding problems, aren't you? And I know this is often said of dyslexic people, that they can actually spot problems that people didn't even know we had, and then find the solutions. That must be really, really fascinating. Can you give us an example of where you've done that?
So obviously some of the most recent big changes that have hit us around COVID, where we had to change our mission posture. Some people who were enabling more people to work from home or other locations to enable them to carry on working effectively. I can't go into a lot of detail on exactly what we've done, but there's some pretty cool technology that we've developed, invented and innovated on to make us an effective organisation in a much more distributed way.
And having had the privilege of actually visiting GCHQ headquarters, I can imagine the amount of transformation and innovation that it took to have a lot of those SPIES and staff actually working remotely in different areas, and yet still being able to deliver on all of the missions that you so critically run for us. Charlotte, if we could come on to you and what you think your dyslexic strengths are. I know we've touched on them before, but can you give us some examples of where you think your dyslexic thinking has helped you to achieve or see things others can't?
Yeah, so I can often spot patterns that my colleagues can't see. Can often spot obvious gaps that my colleagues can't see as well. And in my team, in the 24-hour centre, we have a lot of problems that we need to try and solve. We have a lot of different ways to tackle a problem. And I think one of my biggest strengths I bring to the team is I have a completely different perception of things. So there's another unique way to try and fix a problem. I can't go into too many specifics of what I've done because of what my job role is, but I regularly have to look through large amounts of data, and from being dyslexic, I can quickly process and pull out the vital information.
So it's fascinating. There's so many patterns within dyslexic thinking. It doesn't matter what sphere you're in or what you do that are the same. I was really interested to hear Al, a senior member of GCHQ, described his dyslexic thinking as he can see hundreds and hundreds of different bits of information, and suddenly they all come together. They all just come together and gel, and it's a bit like, I think he said something like it's like a spark or a light bulb moment. And that's exactly what happens with me when I'm trying to, I think one of my strengths is communication, and storytelling. And if I'm trying to work out the best way of communicating something, it is like looking at a big picture, seeing all of this information, and then it just like comes together as a sort of light bulb moment. Would you say that that's similar with your thinking, Charlotte? And I know you can't go into details about what you're actually thinking about or give us too much information, but is that the kind of process that happens with you?
Yeah, so I didn't actually realise that was how my brain worked until Al said it. And then it was kind of like, oh, yeah, I do the same thing. So I'm a shift worker as part of my job role in a 24/7 centre. And sometimes you can spend a whole shift working on one thing, and then it'll be an hour left to go, and you go, now it all makes sense. That's what the thing is. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's very, very cool. And I think also it's the ability to be able to look at something and the solution is so clear. But if somebody asks you why you know that's the solution, it's almost impossible to explain to them, because you're using instinct, you're using a whole range of different senses, but you can just see what that answer is. Does that happen for you too?
Yeah, so I work it's a big team, and I'm not the only dyslexic in the team, but you can really tell who is dyslexic or who is neurodiverse, because there's a lot of us that are like that.
Yeah, it's terribly difficult though when you try and put that into a school situation or an education situation, or even if you're working for an employer that needs to see the process of how you've got to the solution, and it's difficult to explain it. Whereas I think at GCHQ, because you're needing to find those answers quickly and just see the gaps quickly, and there's such a history of knowing that works, you're free to explore that dyslexic thinking, which must be really exciting, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and I think the level of trust that we have as well is it's really important, just to let us get on and do our jobs.
Yeah, well, it's just believing in that superpower that is dyslexic thinking, really, isn't it? And Rob, how about you? Do you have a similar sort of process or feeling, or when I'm just trying to get to help the audience to understand what dyslexic thinking feels like as a process?
Yeah, so I really get the point about the light bulb moment and all of that. I spend a lot of my time talking to people about different capabilities, things they're building, encouraging them to build it for what they're doing. But then what it comes to is there'll be a light bulb moment, and happened a lot with the military stuff that I was doing. There were things that people were building back in the office that had no concept that it could be used in a different way. A lot of those are very sensitive and I can't go into them. But one of the cool things, the team that I was with, had the idea of and built on, and it ended up being the big container that was at the front of the Science Museum was one of my babies. Exactly what's in it, can't go into, but that container and why it exists and the field office that it capability was one of the things that I started. Quite proud of that. It's another really cool thing. But it is, people come back and ask, well, why? How did you get to that answer? And you can answer, don't know. It just is the answer, and you can explain why it's a really good answer, but not how you get there. And that sometimes can be a challenge. But as long as you can tell a good story and why it's going to work for someone, that's great. And it was really successful. But it is all that part of the team, the complementary skills as well. But organising it, because making everything happen in the right order, not quite so good at that bit. Knowing that it's the right thing to do definitely can do that bit.
So as a final thought, our mission is to redefine dyslexia, to help the world understand dyslexia for the amazing strengths and value that it brings to the world. So if I could just come to each of you and ask you, as one final thought for our viewers and listeners, what would you like the world to know about dyslexia? And shall we start with you, Charlotte, on that?
Yep. So I think being dyslexic is nothing to be ashamed of. Your superpowers are unique to you, and you can use them to your advantage to achieve great things.
Fantastic. And Rob, can you tell us what you would like the world to know?
I think I'm very much a made by dyslexia. I've done amazing things and had amazing opportunities, and you really can succeed as a dyslexic and do unique and special things. And just to highlight at the end, as my daughter says, about the only cool thing I've done as a boring old git is that I did get an OBE for my work thing, and I had a day visiting the Queen at the Palace, which is one of the highlights that you can get to with dyslexia.
Oh, amazing. Congratulations. That's fantastic. And then if we can just end with you, Jo, what would you like the world to know?
So I would say that dyslexia is absolutely a strength. And without people who are made by dyslexia working at GCHQ, we wouldn't be who we are today.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Join me next time when I'll be talking to space scientist Dr. Maggie Adair-Pocock about how her dyslexic thinking helped her to see what's never been seen before.